thank you, David. Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. I apologize. I'm in a shared office, so you might hear some background noise. There's people are being marked for their dissertations, so it's a bit of a hectic period here. But yes, so I'm standing in for the director of the institute, Professor Subes Bhattacharya, and we are an institute based at the Montfort University. We are around 42 academics from multiple disciplines, built environment, engineering, social sciences, sort of all working around topics involving sustainability. We have basically two clusters in the institute. One is looking at built environment, building a greener future, and the other one is looking for engineering solutions, either at the smaller or the bigger scale for building a resilient future. So the thing I think that sort of interests me, as David said, I'm an environmental economist. I've done some work on disaster risk reduction at the country level, not so much at the city level, but linking the work that I do and what the Montfort University, where ISF is based, is DMU is big on sustainable development goals. It's the only UK institution that is an academic, what's called a global academic hub in the world, and it's the only UK institution that is sort of looking into all different types of sustainable development goals. And actually DMU is leading on SDG 11, which is on sustainable cities and communities. So therefore, for us, this sort of links really, really nicely. But I was actually struck, if anybody would look at the SDG indicators, not just the goal themselves, but the indicators themselves, there's only 4 indicators that have something to do with disaster risk reduction and reducing risk. Only one of them could potentially be construed as something that is looking to what is happening at cities. So that's from SDG 13, where it's looking at the proportion of local governments that adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies. And it could be anything from reducing the threats of coastal erosion, if that's a coastal city, or if there's implementing nature-based solutions to reduce temperature within city limits. So to me, all I'm trying to say is that it seems like a glaring gap that it's there, both in terms of application, but also in terms of governance. And we're not really thinking about how we can actually how we can mitigate risks at the city level. I mean, David talked about sort of mega cities, which are becoming more and more resilient. There is nothing on that takes, for example, the population density into account, and any type of resiliency measures. So we have no way of measuring it. We have no way of looking at what countries and hubs are doing. At least there's no sort of globally approved method. So what I'm trying to say is I think there's so much room, and David spoke of the need and the importance, but I think there's so much room for us to be able to come up with these I'm a quantitative person. I like quantitative data. So I'm really keen on advancing the discussion around metrics, how we can actually measure this type of resilience, especially at the city level. And I know this is a long conversation. Whenever you talk about data, it becomes complicated. But I think it's an important conversation to have. So I'm keen on what is coming next. Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Manos, it's very, very interesting because from our perspective, we are increasingly involved in what we call national level capability and capacity development, both from a systemic perspective, from a conceptual perspective, and then from an outcome focus, where can we make the change? And it seems to me that from our perspective, actually cities is where the action's at. It is theoretically, really very, very difficult for us either to access or to influence national policy. But city policy makers is very, very simple. I think that between you and me, between us, could probably get our emails answered from any city in the world in 3 days. And there seems to be a real interest there. But what I find is, and we've just given a submission to the United Kingdom House of Lords inquiry on national resilience, and they've put out an interim report which says, mate, we don't need new stuff. We know it. You don't have to have a 3-year inquiry to tell us what to do. What you have to do is to utilize the resources within your community, within your systems, and bring them together so you have an integrated, cohesive structure that allows you to deliver outcomes as desired on a sustainable basis. And yet, we can't do that. It is still, as the Japanese would say, pochi pochi, here, there, all over the place. Nothing really cut together. So I think that one of the things that we've done in the ISRM, one of the influences we've had, because I wrote the thing which said we should be doing this, is what we are very, very good at as a community, as a global community. We are very, very good at creating policies. We create outcomes. We create outputs, rather. We create reports and inquiries and guidelines and this and that and that and this. What we're not very good at, it seems to me, is creating outcomes. How do you make something change? So now pretty well any policy paper that comes out of the Cabinet Office in the UK has to have identifiable outcomes. What are the changes you want to make? What is the timescale associated with that? And what is the evidence you're going to, what is the thing that allows you to evidence the change that's been made? And what's interesting is that although you have these policies in terms of conceptual national level capability and capacity development, when you try and actually, as you say, quantify or identify where the changes are, it is almost always at community level. And we want the community to have more water to, for example, one of the things which I think is fundamentally significant is the idea of green communities. You take responsibility for creating a green community that's local, it's owned. It has an outcome in 6 months. You can show what it is. You dig the pond in 6 months, and in a year you have greenery around that, and you have frogs, and then you bring the schools in to look after it. But it seems to me that if we can go back to the hippies of the 1960s, think global, act local, have an impact. So what I'm going to do, Manoj, is I'm going to allow you to comment on that, and then we'll go around the table. Okay. So just feel free to open up the conversation, and then we'll take it from there. Okay.
No, I think, there's not much for me to add. I do find it interesting because going back to the discussion that what I was saying before about metrics and measurable metrics, it's so difficult to be able to measure success unless it's in the micro scale. And I think that's what investors are looking for. They're looking for ways of quantifying or of getting some sort of measurable idea of effectiveness of measures so that they can potentially fund it. They're looking for any kind of metrics that would sort of indicate the level of risk, of financial risk that they would actually absorb if they were to fund these types of measures. So I do think that it's, for example, what you mentioned about timescales. I do think that it's so important in this conversation. People need to know how long this will last. Anything that involves sort of going back to the discussion about nature-based solution, for example, we know that this is a medium to long-term solution, but actually, people like to know, okay, how long that is. How long do we expect that ecosystem, to recover? Is it 10 years? Is it 15 years? When do we actually expect to see some of the benefits? So we can actually reap some of the other benefits from that. And I think that's so timescales and the effectiveness of the solutions. I think that's something that we should definitely see how we can actually produce. Well, from my side, I'm thinking about how we can produce numbers and data and indicators that are usable and understandable. But I do believe in the need of frameworks of how this can actually be sort of communicated across disciplines. I'm very happy and confident within my own discipline, but that doesn't mean that everybody should understand what I'm talking about. Is that what you had in mind, David? Is that
it's interesting?
Yeah.
But the thing about it is, if we want to quantify, then we've got to structure. There has to be a structure behind it. And one of the thoughts, of course, of the things is that we don't understand how cities work. We tend to think of cities as being mechanistic in terms of their structure and their infrastructure and their activities, but actually they're not. Cities make much more sense if you see them in terms of ecosystems. We talk about the system as a metaphor, the body, the hearts and lungs of the city's arterial roads, blood. So we use that metaphor. But actually, if you go out of the great cities of the West and go into the great cities of the East and the South, you go into Lagos, for example, or Bangkok, or you go into Mumbai, you go into Calcutta. Those are not managed cities. They're not chaotic cities either, but how they function is not based on our Western idea of a managed city. Those of people who do this stuff know that Rem Koolhaas was a great conceptualist, but he used Lagos as an example. I lived in Lagos for 2.5 years, and I wrote a paper about this. But he said Lagos is not catching up with us. We are catching up with Lagos. That idea of a city which is basically organic and based on multiple micro negotiations in order to function rather than a centralized management system, that is how sort of the cities of the future will be developing. And I think it is a valid model that is completely different from our understanding, which basically our understanding of a city goes back basically 3,000 years to the Greeks. You know, if you look at a Greek idea of a city, it's pretty much our understanding of a Western city today. And I think there are different models of that coming out. It's interesting you talk about sort of the rate of change. I'll bring two examples. One was at the beginning of COVID. So 2020, March, April 2020. And when the world went into lockdown, within 4 days, the planet started healing itself. You know, literally, pollution over China disappeared. Pollution over the Himalayas disappeared. The river Ganges, the water started getting better. We saw butterflies coming back. We saw the waters in our rivers getting cleaner.
Really?
Literally in 4 days.
Huh?
And all the planet was saying was stop poisoning us and we can handle everything else. And it was a signal that actually the solutions or the options are very, very close to the surface if we just stop doing stupid stuff. And yet we can't. We went straight back into doing stupid stuff. So that's the first thing. The second point is Chernobyl, you know, which is basically in Russia, the nuclear power station which took off and radiated everything around that. But if you go back there now, it is a paradise it is a wildlife paradise. The wolves are back, the bears are back, you know, the berries are back. All you need to do is take humans out of the picture. You take humans out of the picture and everything goes back to as it was. And it goes back quickly. Manos, I'm sure you know, this is not a 30-year program. This is a 6 months to 12-month program. And you stop doing stupid stuff. And yet, as humans, we cannot do that.